So, as I shared in the first service, I see that you are a most mindfully, joyfully awake congregation. And the meditation I usually do is a mindfulness one. So, instead, I'm just going to invite you to close your eyes if you choose to and avert your gaze to the floor otherwise, maybe with your feet flat on the ground as you sit in contemplation and listen to Chris's beautiful music, and he'll lead us out of that. And I do invite you that as you do so to notice that flow of life moving through your most glorious body, through every capillary and every blood vessel, that flow of life, that breath that is just moving in and as and through you, that breath of life that makes you this most radiant, vibrant being.
This day is what we have. Yesterday has left and is gone. Why wait for tomorrow's sun to shine? This day is now. Live life today. Live life today. Don't get lost in yesterday's song. And don't wait for another day that may not come. This day is now what we have. This day is now. Wake up every morning to a brand new baby day, filled with life, filled with all the things that you could do, and filled with love and light, filled with hope, filled with all the joy you could find and could share. Lift your eyes, raise your voice, for this day is here. Live your life today. Start living in this moment and start seeing all around you, and start opening your heart to the perfect expression of life that surrounds you, the joy and the love and the beauty to see. Live life today. Don't get lost in yesterday's song. And don't wait for another day that may not come. This day is now what we have. This day is all that we need. This day is now.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I just love it here. And although I've watched videos of Reverend Rogers' sermons online, this is the only second time I've been here in person. The first time was 2 weeks ago, and once service started, I could feel my body relaxing into the embrace of being back home again. Then, when Reverend Lark started to share her message about the prayer for protection, I knew this was most definitely home. You see, I was raised in unity as a child. There was, however, a 20-year gap when I didn't go to church. But when I turned 40, I had a deep desire to belong to a religious spiritual community. I visited many different churches of all faith traditions until I settled upon North Hollywood Church of Religious Science, which is also known as Center for Spiritual Living. And then when I moved here from California 3 years ago, I became a member of Center for Spiritual Living Prescott, which is where I'm a licensed practitioner and I'm on the path of becoming a licensed CSL minister. But that said, I will be coming back here as often as I can because this is also my home. As a child, I loved going to church. I loved going with my mother. And occasionally my father would go with us, but he didn't like it all that much. My mother, however, loved going to church, and I loved going anywhere with her. I also looked forward to the sugar cookies that were served after church. I usually asked my mother if I could stay with her instead of going to Sunday school. I didn't like where we met, which was in the galley kitchen of the building that on other days of the week was the Kiwanis Club. It was crowded with pots and pans hung overhead, and it made the little space feel all the more cramped. I'd rather sit next to my mother, who would look fashionably stylish in something colorful, such as a Peter Max print dress, for those of you who remember the iconic artist from the 1960s. And she would sing with robust enthusiasm, even though she was tone deaf and sang off key. I was proud she was my mother, and even more than that, I loved her deeply. And then when I learned to read, I found another thing I loved about going to church. When service ended, we would gather into an adjacent meeting hall for fellowship. And in between the two rooms, there was a large mirror that was propped up against the console table. And on top of that, it said in large gold letters, "The face of God." I loved looking at this mirror and seeing my face as the face of God reflect back to me. One of the first sentences I learned to speak was, "I am a perfect child of God." I didn't know what it meant, but I knew that when I repeated it after my mother, her face would beam a huge smile back at me. So I said it often because I loved that I could make her so happy. So before I continue, I want to share the belief that some people have that our first God, or if you prefer to put it another way, our first experience of God is with our parents. This makes sense to me because a child's life is ruled and dictated by their parents. Or to quote the AI overview I pulled up on Google, the first time I've used AI, the idea that parents are a child's first God suggests that parents, as the primary caregivers, hold a position of immense importance and authority in a child's early life, often shaping their understanding of the world and their relationships, including their concept of a higher power. Yes, my first God was my mother because she was the one who taught me about my relationship to the world and how to be in the world as a perfect child of God. I didn't know what God was, but I knew what a perfect child was. But then when I was 4 years old, my mother punished me for something I did, sending me to my room for a timeout. I asked her, "If I'm a perfect child of God, why are you punishing me?" She told me, "You are a perfect child of God, but your behavior wasn't perfect." One day, my mother picked me up from preschool, and I was just fuming. "I hate Karen Barker. She stole all my roly-poly bugs." Now, these were the little pill bugs that we would collect at the playground. My mother told me, "As a perfect child of God, you cannot hate. You can only love because God made you out of love." I refuse to accept this. No, there's a part of me that isn't love that hates Karen Barker. Honey, no, that can't be because you're only love. No, there's a small part of me that you can't see that hates Karen Barker. Honey, you may think that, but that's not so because you're only love. Well, there's a real teeny, teeny, tiny part of me that you don't see that hates her. Alas, my mother was used to this. She even bought me a t-shirt that said, "I'm Taurus, I'm stubborn." I also didn't know what stubborn meant, so I wore it with pride. My obstinate temper would also flare up sometimes when we go on bike rides in our neighborhood that had lots of curvy, winding streets. And when my mother rode ahead of me so that I couldn't see her, I'd feel panicked that she'd left me and get mad. But she would tell me that no matter what, even if I couldn't see her, that she would always be with me. But then she became sick and died 2 years later when I was 12 years old. But while she was sick, she would tell me again and again that even though she wouldn't be here with me in body, she would be here with me in spirit. For her love for me would always be with me, that she would always be with me. And so for many years, my mother, teaching me about the world, about God, about myself as a perfect child of God, was the only God I knew. Now, as I grew older, I came to understand that there was something greater than my mother, that was called God, and that God was love, that God created me out of love, that God loved me unconditionally, that God was always for me, that God was always with me. And although I believed this, I also believed that my mother would always be with me. I still felt abandoned when she died. I felt abandoned by her and by God. And that was when I started to drift away from church and from God. Now we know that God never leaves us, but we can choose whether or not we wish to engage with God and how we wish to do so. We determine our relationship with God, just as we do with all our relationships. And I do believe that they are all interconnected and reflective of one another. I know that I couldn't learn how to have the tender, gentle compassion I now have for myself and others if I didn't first learn that this is the same tender, gentle compassion that God has for me. During this time of drifting, when I no longer felt a connection to God or to church as I did when I was a child, there were moments when I did feel that I was indeed cared for, provided for, protected by something greater than me. Even if this was somehow intertwined with my belief of my mother still being my God, my divine protective love, who was no longer here in body, but with me in spirit. Maybe this was because of my longing for her to be with me. And so I was open to receiving this divine presence, whether that be my mother or God, or what I now believe is God in and as and through my mother, whose spirit is always with me. After my mother died, I was on my own in many ways, in that my father, who depended on my mother as much as I did, to tell him what to do and how to do it from the moment he woke up until he went to bed, he seemed to have felt just as lost and abandoned as I did. And as my first practitioner told me, you learn how to be codependent on your mama's lap. Well, my father not only lost the love of his life, he also in many ways lost his mind. So it ended up that when I was 16 years old, I went to live with my 93-year-old great-grandmother in her one-bedroom apartment in East Hollywood. She lived on a limited income of supplemental Social Security, but she was the only other living relative that I had. Now, I want to make this clear. This isn't a sob story. In fact, I rarely share this from the pulpit because it's not who I am. But what I want to share with you is how I got from that point in time, at 16 years of age, applying for Medi-Cal and living on my mother's Social Security benefits, to here as an adult who will be ready for Medicare, woo, in less than 30 days. Living a fully abundant life of joy, peace, and love. I didn't do it by myself. I did it knowing always, no matter what, even with my up and down feelings of abandonment, that somehow God was always with me, here for me, to provide for me, to help me, sending angels and blessings in many shapes and forms and ways and means. But I couldn't have been open and receptive to this, much less made it the foundation of my life, if it hadn't been that I was given the greatest inheritance of learning the basic spiritual principles of unity and how to apply them with spiritual practices. One of the first spiritual practices that my mother taught me was how to pray. And the first prayer I learned was the prayer of protection. So I invite you to say it together using me. The light of God surrounds me. The love of God enfolds me. The power of God protects me. The presence of God watches over me. Wherever I am, God is well. For years, I carried a copy of this prayer on a card that I kept in my wallet. And when I needed it, I would pull it out and say it. On the back of the card was a toll-free phone number for the Silent Unity prayer line, which, just like my AAA card, I would call in case of emergency. My mother also taught me how to start my mornings by reading the daily word, which we would read together out loud. I subscribed to the daily word all through the years I didn't go to church and for many years after that. And just as I carried a copy of the prayer for protection with me, I also carried my daily word with me. At work, I would keep it on my desk and read it throughout the day. One day, my computer went out, and my reaction was that of crisis mode. Now, this was over 40 years ago, so I hadn't yet learned the skills of how to choose to respond to such situations. So when the computer tech guy came in to fix it, I gave him an earful. And when he pulled out my desk to unplug the computer and check it out, he grinned at me as he handed me my copy of the Daily Word, saying, "Here, you might want this." I was embarrassed, not just by my behavior, but because it felt like I got caught with my spiritual slip carelessly showing itself. Yet all the same, I was grateful, because having my copy of the Daily Word available to me was something that I depended on, an essential in my life, even at times if my behaviors and actions weren't in alignment with it. During the time I didn't go to church, I would all the same every so often choose to participate in spiritual experiences, such as a one-day retreat, or when I went on a week-long retreat at the Unity campus in Kansas City, Missouri, when I was 30 years old. Being there felt much like when I first came here 2 weeks ago, like I was at home. But this home was a glorious, majestic one full of blooming rose gardens, a towering building just for prayer, and clusters of adorable mini villages with quaint cottages. One night, James Dillett Freeman, the minister poet who wrote the prayer for protection, came to give us a reading of his work. What I remember was how he was so very humble and generous of spirit. I also was able to go to the campus library and get a copy of the Daily Word for my day of birth. This, however, felt a bit of a letdown because it told me something that I already knew, that I had codependency tendencies. But it was gently worded in that it said I could trust and let God do his work for other people and I didn't have to do it for them. My mother also taught me to be a grateful receiver and giver through the spiritual practice of tithing. Every January, she'd give me a cardboard box in the shape of an A-frame that was a piggy bank for me to put money into each week, which I earned from doing chores. When it got full, we'd take the money out and give it to the church in the collection basket. This cultivated a responsible financial stewardship that I am ever so grateful for. Perhaps one of the greatest gifts that my mother gave me was that of meditation. She didn't teach me how to meditate, but she did invite me to sit with her in the stillness of silence after we read the Daily Word aloud each morning. She would close her eyes, and I would close my eyes and peek every so often to see if she was done. She also held group meditations in our home, which I wasn't part of. Yet she taught me something essential about meditation, essential about life. One night after her meditation group had left, she came into the family room where I was watching TV. Sabrina, honey, we could hear you laugh while we were meditating. Now, I do have, and I always have had, an extremely hearty, loud laugh. When I apologized, she said, "It's okay because laughter is one of the best meditations there is. It's just not that, it's just that that's not the kind of meditation that we do." And laughter is one of the best meditations that I know of. So these were the spiritual teachings and principles that my mother taught me and that I embraced at first because I love my mother. But over time, they were my grounding anchor, which steadied me when life felt shaky. To this day, when I find myself in a situation that I perceive to be challenging, I'll repeat my grounding mantra: I am a perfect child of God. And I have another grounding mantra that I learned somewhere along the way, something that came out of learning about the beginning years of Unity, that Myrtle Fillmore, wife of founder Charles Fillmore, had been diagnosed with chronic tuberculosis, and that she refused this diagnosis, saying, "As a perfect child of God, I do not inherit illness." And she lived to be 86 years old. I use this whenever I have a health challenge, most recently when I fell over a rug and broke my femur last year. While I was waiting in the emergency room for a doctor, I repeated this prayer, adding, "I am perfect health now. All is well." Now, one thing, the greatest thing I inherited, that I call the greatest inheritance, are these spiritual principles and practices that have shown me how to live my life so that my first priority is my relationship with God. Not the God that I first believed in of my mother, but a God that I now believe that is omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, all-wise, omnipresent, ever-present, and most of all, divine love that gives of itself without condition, without ceasing, ever so perfectly. This is what I call my Father, Mother, God, my heavenly parent that comforts me so tenderly, so lovingly cares for me, so gently guides and directs me, so powerfully protects me, so abundantly provides for me, and shows me that all of these qualities have also been given to me as a perfect child of God, made out of the golden stardust of God's perfect divine love in God's very same spiritual image and likeness. This is the greatest inheritance that we are all given as the divine heirs to the kingdom of God consciousness, where all things are made possible with God. And it's what the Unity faith tradition teaches is available for all of us, if we but choose to receive it. This is the Christ consciousness of divine love that we receive with grace and gratitude when we meet each person on our path as the face of God. This is giving each person the gift of truly being seen, heard, and understood, of being loved. And if we give this gift to others, we can't help but give it to ourselves as well. This is the greatest inheritance, to know that as God's beloved, we are all loved, lovable, and loving. As I said earlier, I do believe that my mother is very much here with me in spirit. I know that her spirit is not just with me, but that it speaks to me without words. But all the same, I hear her guidance and direction. And I feel her love for me as she is with me always. A few years ago, I wanted to deepen my spiritual understanding, and so I explored different options of doing so and ended up going to Claremont School of Theology and getting my Master of Divinity degree. At my graduation ceremony, as I walked up to the stage to accept my degree, and all of the exuberant excitement of the crowd, for this was a year after COVID, I could hear, yes, actually hear, the gentle whisper of my mother. I am so very proud of you. You have so much to give the world. To be able to receive all the gifts I've been blessed with, and in turn share them with the world, is something that to this day I am in awe of. Yes, I am in awe, for it is an astonishment of riches. The greatest inheritance is something that I don't talk about very much, but I don't need to because I do believe it is an evident inheritance. Years ago, after a few months of dating this one gentleman, I told him that I was about to buy my first home. He didn't know much about me, but he knew that my parents had died. He said, "It must be nice." I said, "Yeah, I'm very grateful." He said, "Yeah, it's great that you had rich parents who left you money." I just giggled and smiled and said, "Yeah." And I think that was one of our last dates. But what he told me has stayed with me because I am grateful for my infinitely rich, heavenly Father, Mother, God, who showers me with blessings each and every moment.